August 1942, Iron Bottom Sound shimmered under the silver light of a quarter moon, while restless Pacific currents whispered beneath the American PT boats. Each wooden hull vibrated under twin Packard engines, their exhaust roaring through the night as crews believed technology would compensate for experience they never possessed. Somewhere across the dark water, Japanese admirals aboard cruisers Kumano and Suzuya watched phosphorescent wakes slicing the black surface like restless ghosts searching for vengeance. Officers peered through binoculars, murmuring disbelief that such fragile craft dared to challenge armored leviathans built for open ocean dominance. The Americans had been promised that the Mark 13 torpedo, sleek and modern on paper, would turn these plywood streaks into sea-borne assassins. Newport's Bureau of Ordnance sent assurances, citing laboratory trials where every device struck dead center under controlled conditions no battlefield could replicate. In reality, the weapon ran too deep, armed too late, and burst prematurely under the stress of real combat. Yet Washington dispatches repeated phrases like reliable and lethal, a comforting allusion to men who would soon witness 1,700 pounds of TNT vanish harmlessly into the sea. As the first attack formation aligned, Lieutenant Griffin aboard PT-117 checked his stopwatch and radioed the signal to open tubes. Torpedoes splashed out, steam trails flashing like silver arrows before disappearing beneath churning foam that reflected brief starlight. The Japanese destroyer Amagiri adjusted speed, its lookouts reporting multiple tracks crossing astern without detonation. Aboard the flagship, Admiral Kusaka laughed dryly, commenting that the enemy's weapons seemed trained to protect their targets rather than destroy them. When the first barrage ended, the sea fell silent except for engine echoes and scattered shells splashing harmlessly off the bow of retreating boats. Radio men reported, "no hits," the phrase that would haunt every after-action summary for the next 18 months of Pacific night patrols. Back on Tulagi Harbor, mechanics loaded fresh Mark 13s, scratching their heads over pitted warheads and bent impellers corroded by salt. The promise of precision had met the reality of pressure, and the myth of the unsinkable swarm was already bleeding through its own propaganda. Yet for men aboard those boats, failure was still disbelief rather than shame, a malfunction to be fixed before tomorrow's patrol. They wiped salt from their eyes, checked fuel levels, and pretended confidence for the sake of younger crewmates who could not afford to see fear. Across Iron Bottom Sound, Japanese searchlights wandered like lazy gods mocking mortals who had mistaken courage for certainty. The war was young, but the oceans had already chosen which machines they trusted to survive. September 1942, at the Newport Torpedo Station in Rhode Island, the clang of tools echoed through hangars filled with overconfidence and fluorescent light. Engineers believed their blueprints represented perfection incarnate, charts marked with impossible precision and calculations untouched by the saltwater realities haunting distant Pacific patrols. Drafting tables displayed diagrams of magnetic exploders designed to detonate beneath armored keels, promising an invisible punch stronger than any naval shell ever conceived. The problem was faith without proof, a doctrine of mathematics untested by chaos, detached from the desperation shaping battles thousands of miles away. Each Mark 13 torpedo emerged from those workshops looking flawless, its casing polished, fins perfectly balanced, gyro mechanisms humming beneath proud inspection tags. Trials conducted inside calm freshwater basins recorded predictable performance, straight running lines, and impact fuses responding to idealized pressures that never existed in motion. Reports stamped "successful evaluation" circulated through Washington corridors faster than skepticism could form, carried by officers who feared questioning the hierarchy defining American military engineering pride. Dissenters were branded unpatriotic dreamers or accused of misunderstanding experimental variants, as if oceans would someday obey administrative optimism. Across the Pacific, sailors noticed patterns that statistics had hidden: torpedoes running deeper than depth gauges predicted, missing destroyer hulls entirely. Letters sent from combat zones vanished inside bureaucratic layers, rewritten into summaries praising efficiency despite mounting operational evidence, contradicting every congratulatory paragraph. Mechanics scavenged damaged examples from failed sorties, dissecting their mechanisms under lantern light, discovering warped pistons, faulty detonators, and alignment errors caused by untested assembly shortcuts. Still, the headquarters persisted in labeling field complaints as isolated incidents, unworthy of halting the production line driving wartime quotas. Rear Admiral Ralph Christie, champion of the Mark series, defended its reputation before colleagues increasingly skeptical of optimistic reports reaching frontline commanders. He argued that operator mishandling explained the anomalies, suggesting that untrained crews lacked the procedural discipline required for technical perfection. Yet within torpedo bays aboard PT bases from Tulagi to Rendova, whispered jokes spread comparing their weapons to fireworks designed for entertainment rather than warfare. Crews adapted through superstition, adjusting firing angles or praying before launches, believing ritual might succeed where engineering had betrayed them. By winter, whispered frustration turned to quiet resentment, the distance between factory idealism and field consequence becoming impossible to disguise. The Mark 13 remained a triumph of theory, imprisoned within metal, incapable of fulfilling its promises, a weapon that lied by omission. Its creators never meant deceit, yet denial became complicity, and complicity consumed truth until reality surfaced in wreckage and silence. Beneath the laughter of distant admirals, an American invention was drowning in its own untested confidence. October 1942, under the moonless skies of the Solomon Islands, PT boat squadrons slipped silently past reefs and shadowed coves, engines barely whispering over the black water. The salty night air carried the scent of diesel and fear, mixed with anticipation born from weeks of frustrated training and inconclusive skirmishes against enemy convoys. Lieutenant Robert Reed's PT-109 led the formation, scanning for silhouettes of Japanese supply craft that moved like predators along narrow straits, seemingly unaware of the wooden hunters stalking them. Crews clutched their life jackets and weapons with sweaty hands, aware that one misjudged turn could expose them to gunfire capable of slicing plywood into splinters. Reports from earlier missions, often dismissed by distant headquarters, haunted their imaginations. Tales of torpedoes that spiraled uselessly beneath hulls or detonators that failed, despite perfect aim. Reed's orders emphasized coordination, timing, and stealth, yet no protocol could compensate for the mechanical betrayals awaiting beneath polished steel casings. Observers noted the horizon's faint glow from distant fires, Japanese shore positions illuminating water like lanterns on glass, yet the illusion of invisibility emboldened the crews to approach daringly close to potential annihilation. The ocean, calm but deceptive, mirrored the stars above, offering no warning before torpedoes would misfire or craft would tremble under unseen pressure. As they approached Kula Gulf, radar was sparse, and visual reconnaissance dictated survival. Every wave crest concealed potential ambushes, Japanese destroyers patrolling silently, searchlights trained for movement, ready to punish any mistake. The PT boats' wooden hulls, agile but fragile, rode higher than designed, exposing crews to bullets and shrapnel from far superior armaments. Torpedoes were loaded and armed, but anxiety replaced confidence, the men knowing each launch represented equal parts hope and near certainty of mechanical disappointment. The human element carried more weight than technology ever had in these narrow channels. Lieutenant Reed gave the signal, engines accelerating cautiously, wake dissipating into the night. Squadrons fanned out, torpedoes primed, eyes straining to pierce darkness and recognize the faintest silhouette of enemy transport. Each crew member understood that their lives depended as much on luck as training, and months of failures amplified every heartbeat. The Solomons themselves seemed conspiratorial, reefs jutting unpredictably from the water, moonlight absent, visibility minimal, terrain unfamiliar, tides shifting silently beneath the keel, threatening grounding or collision. At the moment of first firing, torpedoes leapt into the water, phosphorescent trails fleeting against ink-black seas. Some engines sputtered immediately, others plowed below target, ignoring commands as if mocking those who had built and maintained them. The night erupted in tense chaos, splashes from returning Japanese gunfire marking the narrow escape of the tiny vessels. Crews screamed over wind and engine roar, praying mechanical failures would not claim their lives. Each misfired torpedo reinforcing the bitter truth of repeated institutional betrayal. November 1942, amid the tempestuous waters surrounding Guadalcanal, PT boats braved rough seas, narrow passages, and constant threat of enemy gunfire, crews steeling themselves against both nature and adversaries. Lieutenant Commander Alan Montgomery coordinated multiple squadrons, tracking enemy supply lines with painstaking precision while facing the gnawing frustration of repeated torpedo failures that had eroded confidence among officers and enlisted alike. Every engagement had become a delicate balance between courage and futility, as each torpedo launch could either secure victory or invite near-certain disaster without inflicting measurable damage on Japanese warships. Reports from Tulagi emphasized that Mark 13 torpedoes frequently ran deeper than intended. Detonators failed without warning, and crews risked life unnecessarily in attempts to deliver ineffective ordnance. The ocean, deceptively calm, concealed hazards from submerged reefs to enemy destroyers whose searchlights pierced darkness, exposing PT boats to accurate, devastating fire while their intended weapon remained unreliable and capricious. Crews clutched equipment, scanning shadows for silhouettes, aware that misjudged distance or timing could result in a catastrophic collision with jagged reefs or incoming shells from faster, heavier enemy craft. Lieutenant Reed led PT-109 along a strategic intercept route, aware that previous attacks had produced 0 confirmed hits despite dozens of torpedoes fired. Each sailor remembered the anticlimactic explosions, failed contacts, and torpedoes porpoising uselessly across the black water, eroding morale and sowing doubt about both equipment and leadership. Yet training, doctrine, and the hope of redemption compelled officers to persist, maneuvering in tight formations designed to maximize surprise and minimize exposure, while the sea's unpredictability magnified every decision's risk. The night grew colder, the wind whipping around wooden hulls, soaking crews with spray and fatigue, while overhead stars offered no guidance beyond their indifferent brilliance. Torpedo tubes were loaded, depth settings checked repeatedly, and firing sequences rehearsed, each movement methodical but haunted by memories of prior failures. One misaligned target, one errant current, or one defective exploder could render the mission meaningless, yet the American sailors pressed forward, committed to completing orders in a campaign that had already claimed friends and stretched endurance to its limit. As the first volley left the tubes, the night erupted with flares, tracer rounds, and enemy responses. While some torpedoes failed instantly, others ran harmlessly beneath transports, and a few exploded prematurely with deafening concussions. The chaos was surreal. Crews shouted over engines, struggling to maintain formation while evading deadly gunfire. Every failure reinforced the bitter realization that institutional oversight had allowed these defects to persist, condemning men to dangerous, often futile engagements, while distant commanders clung to doctrine rather than confront glaring mechanical shortcomings. By dawn, PT squadrons had returned battered but intact, torpedoes expended, confidence shattered, and the stark pattern of repeated operational impotence painfully clear. Montgomery documented failures meticulously, compiling statistics that confirmed what crews had long known. Torpedo technology, flawed design, and inadequate testing had rendered the primary weapon of PT boats almost entirely ineffective. September 1943, Noumea, New Caledonia, a tense atmosphere filled the naval conference room as officers gathered to review PT boat operational failures across the Solomon Islands. Admiral William Hawley demanded absolute transparency, refusing to tolerate obfuscation, while junior officers nervously prepared to present damning evidence of torpedo deficiencies, fearing career-ending consequences for honest reporting. Charts, tables, and meticulously logged after-action reports littered long oak tables, each figure representing countless hours of patrol, risked lives, and virtually no combat success against Japanese convoys navigating narrow, treacherous passages under cover of darkness. Commander Montgomery presented detailed calculations. highlighting the staggering futility of hundreds of torpedoes fired with minimal results, demonstrating that PT boats achieved a mere 2.4% effective hit ratio across engagements. Submarine officers, their own vessels having experienced similar failures, voiced scathing critiques of torpedo designs, emphasizing that the Mark 13's mechanical unreliability, depth control errors, and sensitive magnetic exploder rendered American ordnance virtually useless in real combat scenarios. Engineers from the Naval Torpedo Station attempted to defend design decisions, citing peacetime testing and recent modifications, but their justifications faltered under the weight of empirical evidence compiled over months of operational disaster. Lieutenant Reed provided frontline testimony, recounting repeated missions where torpedoes ran harmlessly beneath enemy hulls, exploded prematurely, or simply failed to detonate, often under the most carefully executed attacks. Officers and sailors present listened in stunned silence as he described the psychological toll on crews, the erosion of morale, and the mounting frustration of risking life for weapons that betrayed them repeatedly. The evidence was irrefutable, forcing senior officers to confront uncomfortable truths about procurement, design oversight, and the human cost of institutional negligence during wartime operations. Statistical displays illustrated 743 torpedoes launched with only 18 effective hits, 6 of which actually resulted in ship sinkings, a ratio exposing catastrophic inefficiency that contrasted sharply with similar British and German torpedo systems. Commanders argued passionately that PT boat doctrine, derived from peacetime exercises and unrealistic assumptions, had failed to account for alert, well-defended enemy targets, the noise generated by wooden hulls, and the necessity of extreme proximity to launch points under deadly fire. The conference room's atmosphere thickened with tension as officers acknowledged that both technology and tactics had contributed to persistent failures across the South Pacific theater. Holly concluded with decisive authority. PT boats would no longer prioritize torpedo attacks, focusing instead on anti-barge missions, reconnaissance, and coastal harassment, where speed, maneuverability, and guns provided meaningful combat impact. The decision marked a turning point in operational strategy, preserving the lives of sailors while salvaging the tactical value of vessels long considered indispensable, despite repeated operational futility. Officers left the conference with grim resolve, aware that systemic failures had jeopardized both missions and men, but also recognizing a path forward that emphasized realistic capabilities over heroic, yet ineffectual attempts at torpedo warfare. October 1943, Tulagi Harbor, the transformation of PT boats into gunboats, became a tangible reality as crews adjusted to newly installed 40mm cannons, rocket launchers, and reinforced deck mounts. Lieutenant John Coley examined the retrofitted PT-191, noting the reduced torpedo capacity and increased emphasis on gunnery, recognizing that success now depended on rapid, accurate fire rather than flawed ordnance that had failed relentlessly for more than a year. Officers and crews adapted quickly to this radical shift in mission profile, retraining tirelessly to exploit their vessels' speed and maneuverability in shallow, confined coastal waters previously dominated by Japanese barges and destroyers. Japanese supply routes had remained vital for garrisons on New Britain and Bougainville, relying on fast-moving barges to deliver troops, ammunition, and food along narrow coastal channels under cover of darkness. PT boat commanders now focused on intercepting these small, lightly armed vessels, exploiting their capacity to approach undetected, unleash concentrated machine gun and cannon fire, and withdraw before alert Japanese destroyers could respond. Training exercises emphasized coordinated sweeps, rapid target acquisition, and suppressive fire, ensuring that every crew member understood the importance of timing, angle, and concentration to maximize destruction of enemy logistics craft. On the night of November 3, 1943, Coley's division of 4 PT boats engaged 7 Japanese barges moving along the northern coast of New Britain. Coordinated attacks combined tracers, rockets, and high-velocity shells, delivering devastating results that contrasted sharply with earlier torpedo operations, where hundreds of weapons had failed. Within 20 minutes, all 7 barges burned or sank, and PT crews sustained only minor damage to paintwork and rigging, demonstrating the effectiveness of the new tactics and restoring confidence that had been shattered during 2 years of relentless failures and misfires across the Solomons campaign. Morale aboard PT boats soared as gunnery replaced torpedo attacks, providing immediate visible results that crews could comprehend and celebrate, while Japanese supply officers began altering convoy tactics, moving in larger groups, under stricter escort, and adjusting routes to mitigate these unexpected threats. Letters home described the exhilaration of watching each round strike its mark, the deafening roar of cannons, and the shock of finally experiencing the satisfaction of meaningful combat achievement after countless frustrating sorties that had delivered nothing but wasted ammunition and fear.
By December 1943, American commanders documented measurable improvements in mission outcomes, reporting that gun-based PT boat operations had destroyed dozens of barges monthly, reducing enemy supply efficiency while preserving personnel and vessels. The transition revealed the adaptability of both crews and command, demonstrating that tactical evolution in response to technological failures could produce tangible battlefield success and psychological restoration. A lesson forged in the crucible of repeated failure, human perseverance, and hard-won operational insight.
January 1944, Solomon Islands. PT crews now face the dual reality of newfound effectiveness and lingering memories of countless failed torpedo attacks, creating a mix of exhilaration and lingering trauma. Lieutenant Ensign Ballantyne reflected on the stark contrast between the brutal frustration of 1942 to 1943 and the immediate gratification of successful gunboat raids, understanding that morale had become a critical determinant of operational effectiveness in confined, contested waters against vigilant Japanese patrols. Men whispered stories of former hopelessness, of torpedoes failing silently beneath enemy hulls, and the black humor that developed as coping mechanisms during long, tense nights at sea. The Japanese, observing the sudden surge in PT boat destruction of barges, adjusted tactics reluctantly, deploying destroyer escorts in larger numbers and enforcing stricter coastal route discipline to counteract these newly potent threats. Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka recorded in operational logs the unexpected effectiveness of American gunboat tactics, noting how speed, surprise, and concentrated fire now compelled additional planning and resource allocation that had previously been unnecessary. The psychological shift aboard enemy vessels became apparent as captains hesitated, delaying landings and altering schedules, a testament to the indirect power that accurate, reliable weaponry could confer in limited coastal theaters. PT crews, previously demoralized, discovered renewed purpose in each mission, developing confidence in their weapons, teamwork, and tactical planning. Letters sent home to families described the satisfaction of seeing immediate results, watching flaming barges drift toward reefs, and understanding that risk now produced tangible, consequential outcomes rather than repeated near-death experiences with zero results. Officers emphasized the importance of precision, target prioritization, and coordination, creating a culture of professionalism and pride that directly countered the despair caused by the torpedo debacle. The shift in PT boat operational doctrine generated a ripple effect throughout Allied command, prompting revised training manuals, tactical debriefings, and officer briefings emphasizing flexible adaptation to enemy responses and vessel capabilities. Naval intelligence reported with cautious optimism that previously ignored threats now demanded attention, allocating scarce Japanese naval resources away from other missions to protect even minor coastal traffic. The acknowledgement of threat credibility underscored the psychological influence that tactical success, even on a smaller scale, could exert across a theater of operations, reshaping perceptions of American naval capacity. By mid-January, the combination of successful raids and visible psychological pressure imposed on Japanese supply lines transformed PT boat operations from an embarrassing footnote into a credible component of Allied coastal warfare strategy, demonstrating that human resilience, operational adaptation, and the ability to convert failures into lessons could fundamentally reshape tactical outcomes and morale across both friendly and enemy forces, validating months of experimentation, risk, and relentless perseverance. February 1944, New Britain waters, PT squadrons executed meticulously coordinated raids against Japanese barges, demonstrating operational precision and tactical refinement previously absent during the torpedo fiasco. Lieutenant John Duke Coley led a 4-boat division, navigating treacherous channels under moonless skies, synchronizing approaches to maximize overlapping fields of fire against unsuspecting enemy supply vessels, exemplifying lessons learned from earlier catastrophic failures. Each maneuver was planned to exploit speed, shallow draft, and heavy machine gun firepower, while simultaneously minimizing exposure to Japanese destroyer patrols, reflecting a profound evolution in operational doctrine and crew confidence. PT crews, having endured years of torpedo ineffectiveness, experienced psychological transformation, their previous fear and frustration replaced by anticipation, professionalism, and reliance on immediate observable results from concentrated gunfire attacks. Observers noted the morale boost that accompanied each successful mission, as flaming barges and disabled craft served as tangible proof of skill, courage, and resilience under conditions once characterized by repeated failure and near-death encounters. Letters to families detailed precision firing, disciplined coordination, and strategic patience, highlighting the crew's growing confidence and ability to execute complex operations without relying on unreliable torpedoes. Japanese commanders, initially dismissive of PT boats as nuisance threats, now recorded with concern and confusion the evolving American methodology, as small, fast-moving gunboats inflicted disproportionate disruption on logistical supply lines, forcing repeated alterations to routes, convoy timing, and escort deployment. Vice Admiral Kusaka's intelligence reports described cautious uncertainty among captains and crews, revealing the profound psychological effect of the sudden operational effectiveness of vessels once considered insignificant. Tactical surprise, concentrated firepower, and persistent harassment imposed delays and additional operational risk on Japanese forces. Allied command recognized the strategic potential of refined PT tactics, issuing updated doctrine emphasizing barge interdiction, coordinated night assaults, and multi-boat firing patterns designed to overwhelm even minimal escort defenses. Training regimens were adjusted to focus on timing, communication, and precise navigation, integrating lessons from previous failures while preserving the high-speed, high-risk nature of coastal engagement. Officers stressed disciplined aggression, risk mitigation, and flexibility, fostering both confidence and professionalism among crews whose early combat experiences had been defined by repeated torpedo failure and wasted effort. By the end of February, PT boats had established themselves as credible, effective coastal combat units, demonstrating that adaptive tactics, morale restoration, and concentrated firepower could convert an initially catastrophic program into an operationally decisive force. Enemy supply lines were disrupted, Japanese officers expressed grudging respect, and American crews finally witnessed tangible results, confirming that perseverance, adaptation, and strategic evolution could overcome technological and institutional shortcomings that had previously rendered their efforts tragically ineffective. March 1944, Solomon Islands, PT squadrons operated as purpose-built gunboats, abandoning primary reliance on torpedoes while exploiting their speed, maneuverability, and concentrated firepower effectively. Commanders implemented new operational frameworks, emphasizing interdiction of Japanese supply barges, coastal reconnaissance, and coordinated assaults to weaken enemy logistical networks, demonstrating how tactical flexibility could compensate for prior systemic weapon failures. Crews adjusted to rapid-fire engagements, calculating trajectories, angles of attack, and distance to targets with precision previously impossible under the failed torpedo doctrine, fostering confidence and operational competence throughout the fleet. Lieutenant John Duke Coley led nightly patrols along Kula Gulf, coordinating simultaneous attacks with multiple divisions, ensuring that each vessel's firepower contributed to cumulative destruction while avoiding exposure to superior Japanese surface vessels. Crew members, long accustomed to the frustration of torpedo ineffectiveness, now experienced the satisfaction of immediate, observable results. Flaming barges, sinking launches, and disrupted enemy supply chains, reinforcing the psychological shift from helplessness to empowerment in combat effectiveness. Observers in headquarters recorded these successes with cautious optimism, acknowledging that the shift from torpedo dependency to gunboat tactics had substantially increased PT operational value. Japanese commanders, noting repeated barge losses, intensified patrols and altered convoy timings, yet these countermeasures only partially mitigated PT effectiveness, as night attacks leveraged speed, stealth, and superior navigational coordination to strike unpredictably, forcing continual adjustments in Japanese coastal defense strategy. Intelligence reports highlighted increasing concern among officers as even minimal PT presence created operational disruptions, compelling reassessment of prior dismissive attitudes towards small, agile American naval forces. The psychological impact on Japanese logistics officers was significant, as they recognized that a relatively small adaptive fleet could inflict disproportionate damage. Allied command capitalized on demonstrated effectiveness, issuing updated tactical manuals emphasizing coordinated gunboat action, multi-vessel target saturation, and flexible response strategies for coastal engagements, embedding lessons learned from repeated torpedo failures into operational doctrine. Training programs reinforced communication discipline, precision firing, and navigation under cover of darkness, ensuring that crews developed a systematic, replicable methodology for maximizing impact while minimizing exposure to enemy retaliation. Adaptation became the defining characteristic of PT operations, highlighting organizational learning from previous combat shortcomings. By mid-1944, PT gunboats had shifted the operational landscape in the South Pacific, causing measurable delays in Japanese supply delivery, frustrating enemy commanders, and restoring confidence and purpose to American crews previously demoralized by catastrophic torpedo failures, proving that flexibility, innovation, and tactical evolution could transform initially ineffective platforms into strategically valuable naval assets. September 1944, Solomon Islands, PT boat crews gathered for quiet reflection, remembering months of frustration, torpedo failures, and countless nights spent facing lethal Japanese firepower. Veterans spoke softly, recalling the psychological toll exacted by ineffective weapons, the constant fear that every attack could be their last, and the bitterness of repeated operational futility despite unwavering courage and commitment. Their voices carried stories of comrades lost to shellfire, accidents, and misfired torpedoes, illustrating the human cost of systemic failures that far exceeded mere statistics or battlefield reports compiled in distant offices. Lieutenant Commander Reed, seated among younger sailors, shared recollections of the 700 torpedoes fired in the South Pacific campaign, emphasizing lessons in resilience, adaptation, and ingenuity, while warning of the dangers inherent in unquestioned reliance on flawed technology and bureaucratic inertia. He reminded all that heroism alone could not compensate for institutional negligence, and that courage demanded not only bravery in battle, but also critical reflection on the tools entrusted to those in harm's way. Stories of barge hunting missions, gunboat transformations, and improvised tactics highlighted how creativity and flexibility allowed the fleet to salvage meaning from prior catastrophes, transforming despair into operational success and restoring confidence eroded by repeated failures. The Japanese perspective, preserved in post-war interviews and diaries, underscored how thoroughly initial American torpedo failures had eroded credibility and provoked contempt. Yet these same enemies adapted to later PT gunboat operations with wary respect, illustrating that even underestimated forces could reshape strategic calculations through ingenuity and relentless perseverance. Historians emphasized how lessons learned from torpedo debacles informed naval procurement reforms, testing protocols, and operational doctrines, embedding the painful experiences of frontline crews into institutional memory for future generations, ensuring that sacrifice translated into enduring improvements rather than forgotten mistakes. Families of the fallen remembered the human cost, honoring courage while confronting the reality that defective weapons had prolonged exposure to lethal danger, claiming lives that might have been spared had organizational accountability matched frontline valor. Veterans described enduring pride in adaptability, camaraderie, and tactical creativity, tempered by sorrow for lost colleagues and frustration at the repeated inability of flawed tools to achieve intended outcomes, despite extraordinary effort, bravery, and precision under extreme pressure. In the end, PT boats survived the failures, their crews endured, and the Pacific campaign was won through persistence, ingenuity, and adaptation. Yet the story of 700 torpedoes fired without meaningful success remains a solemn reminder that courage, while indispensable, cannot replace functional equipment, foresight, and institutional responsibility, leaving a legacy of both heroism and hard-earned lessons engraved in saltwater, memory, and history.